I'm Jeanette, VP of Marketing at TradeHounds, and we are here at the NAED Marketing Summit in San Antonio. And today I'm joined by one of the speakers at the event, Mary Czarnecki. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
And so your job is to speak at events like this, to do workshops, to really help businesses improve their marketing through storytelling. So you're talking about the impact of strategic storytelling, and I'd love for you to share some of your favorite tips from the workshops that you're doing today and through the rest of the week.
Sure. Well, one of the things that I'm sharing first and foremost is that storytelling can give us an advantage where just more information, more specs, more features just doesn't break through, right? When you're looking at that experience that your audience is having with your brand, a lot of times we think more is better, right? More social posts, more content, more emails we're sending out. And what I find is that more doesn't always work. And today, the one thing that we're talking about is how and when to use stories, specifically well-told stories, in place of just more information to create better connections with our audiences.
So for the audiences that we're talking to today, a lot of them are marketing professionals in distribution companies and manufacturing companies, specifically in the electrical space. So what tips do you have for them about how and when to use storytelling in their marketing initiatives?
Well, it's interesting because in B2B situations where a lot of the manufacturers or reps or distributors that are in the audience today, they're dealing with highly technical products. They're dealing with a lot of information, those very detailed spec sheets. But one of the things that I think is underestimated as a competitive advantage is the ability to connect more authentically and actually on an emotional level with those audiences, whether you're a manufacturer trying to work with a distributor or a distributor working with an end customer. The research is telling us, and in my talk today, I'm sharing research from both Forrester and Google that shows that actually B2B buyers have more at stake than B2C consumers when it comes to making buying decisions. And what we see in the research is that B2B buyers tend to make safe bets, right? They're making defensive decisions is what they call it. And they're also more personally invested in the decisions they're making, which is why it's so more important for B2B marketers like we have in the sessions today to actually be communicating on a personal level, the personal value that they can bring, not just the product that they're selling.
So for people who maybe when they hear storytelling, they may not understand, like I'm a former journalist, and so storytelling is something I think about and have talked about a lot. So for me, when you say storytelling or strategic storytelling, I'm like, oh yes, I got it, and I love what you're saying. But maybe for people who don't really understand, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, and there is a lot of misconceptions around storytelling. A lot of times when I first bring it up to people, they'll say, oh yeah, we have our brand story on our website. And then you go to the website, it's, we started in 1813, and our founder did this, and it's like, the 100-year history. The kind of stories that we're talking about in the session today and the stories that I see actually making a difference for people are real in the moment stories. And so one of the things we're breaking down today is actually how to tell those kind of stories, tell stories that have a very specific moment of transformation, that have an emotional component and the kind of details that are going to connect with their audience. So I think some of the misconceptions about story that we're trying to tackle are, like you said, that it has to be this cinematic story or a story that's fit for late night news or, the kind that's going to make you cry. And they're like, we don't need to make our customers cry, Mary. We just need them to buy the thing. So that's the thing that we're addressing. And I think what I need to overcome in a lot of people's minds when they come into my session is, oh, well, we have our brand story and we have our origin story or our founder story. What more do we need? And so what I'm helping people understand is that we can turn a customer story or a story of why you even took this job or why do you make this product into something that actually can shift someone's mindset from just saying, oh, this is just one more distributor of one more manufacturer of the 6 on this street into, oh, this is actually Mary and she gets where I am now. She understands what my daily challenge is. That's interesting. Okay, now tell me more. And so when we get them to lean in and tell me more, we win.
Especially for distribution, we talk a lot about what is the main value prop that distributors have to their customers. And again, we say it's like the quality of the distributor, the service that they provide. And those tend to be the number one things that the buyers care about too. We do a lot of research in TradeHounds and ask them, why do you pick one distributor over the other?
Yeah.
And like them being reliable. And those are things that you can get out of those customer stories that mean a lot more than like price, for example. So let's say I'm a distributor and I have a customer who's willing to share their story. How do I do that? What do I do?
Well, I think you bring up a good point first and foremost, which is we're using these stories for a business goal, right? So we're using, for example, a story to help differentiate. So, okay, everyone has quality products or everyone has great service, but what does that really mean for your business? So now we know what the problem is. Okay, we have to help people understand what this means for us versus the other person who's saying exactly the same thing. So then we find the story that helps with that business challenge. So we start with the business challenge first and then think about, okay, so if my story needs to help them understand why our service is different, why it's at a different level or it produces a different result, that gives us then the clues to start looking for the story. So we need to start finding, okay, which customer or which experience could we highlight that really shows why our service is different. And it's no longer just lip service. It's an actual moment of transformation where we created a difference in someone's business or someone's experience based on the way we do service. So finding a specific moment, not just something that's a generalization.
I love that you say specific, because that is like my number one thing. I used to teach storytelling classes, and it's like, it's about those details. Yes. And again, when I'll go on a website, for example, or I'll see distributor Instagram accounts, everything feels like very vague. And that's like my number one pet peeve. I'm like, no, get into those details, like share the human element. And I think that is like the number one key that I would say for people is like, how do you go into storytelling? Like all of those little details really, really matter. And so if somebody in a distribution company is going to approach a customer story, whether it's a written testimonial or it's a video interview, what are some tips that you have that will help them actually practically like get more specifics out of that customer?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're teaching in today's session and that I work with a lot of my clients on is breaking it down into what I call the recipe and the ingredients. So I married a fourth generation chef, happened to be my high school sweetheart, but I use a lot of food analogies in my work. So when we think about the recipe for this great story, I try to make it as simple as possible. And it's really three parts, like you said. It has to have that moment in that middle, kind of that moment of shift, that moment of transformation. But then we need the before and the after. So it's kind of a three-part sandwich. But that's just your recipe. And any recipe is just as good as the ingredients that you put into it. And so that's where I also have the three ingredients that every story has to have in those three parts, which is it has to have the detail, relevant details that your audience is going to recognize and relate to. It has to have some kind of emotional component, and it then has to have a real character. So when I'm thinking about coaching people on developing these kind of stories, the stories that are going to actually break through and create this emotional shift in their audience, that's what we start with. The three parts to the story, the before, the middle, and the after, and the three ingredients to each part of that story. So we have to have some detail, we have to have some emotion, and we have to have a real character, someone that is the hero, that main character of the story going through this transformation. So for anyone who's trying to create their own stories, that's where I would start, is to think about what was the business challenge, what do we need this story to communicate, and now let's start to frame it in this recipe and story approach.
That's a really good point, because even though you might have a really great customer and they might actually have a very good story, not everybody is good at telling their own story or communicating that. And so I think that's a wonderful point that you put. You have to have that person start with a character. So start with somebody who you think is good at articulating that story. So not just somebody who you helped and can say, yeah, they helped me accomplish this goal, but somebody who can really speak to that in a way that's really compelling for your audience. And I think too, a lot of people will jump to like the storytelling part as like, how do I write it or how do I tell it at the end? But it's also about like the questions you ask. And so can you maybe give some tips to the distributors out there about like what questions should they be asking their customers in order to craft that story that will help them achieve their business goals?
100%. And I would structure those questions around the before, the middle, and the after. So the before, what were you dealing with? Why was it so important to make a change now? Or why were you looking for a new distributor? What was wrong with what you'd been doing before, with the products you'd been using before? What was the need that you had that was going unmet, right? So we get a clear picture of what that before picture was like. And then tell us what happened in the moment, right? What was it that we said? When did you find us? How did you find us? What was that trigger moment for you? So help us understand a little bit about that moment of shift, right? When did that transformation start to happen? And then tell me, well, now what is life like? How would you describe what it feels like now, what you're doing now, what you're able to do in your business now, what your end customers, if it's a B2B to C kind of situation, what is their life like? How does that make you feel about your business? So when you structure your questions aligned with the pieces of the story that we need for the recipe, then you're getting the ingredients that you need to put into the story.
One of my other things that I love about the interview, and I think one thing that would really be valuable for especially marketing people to consider as they're doing these interviews, I've listened to a lot of raw interview footage, and I've heard people, marketing people, actually ask those questions. And sometimes their questions are actually really good. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're asking the right question. You have a good character. But then during the interview, especially if it's a video recording, they will interject or cut them off or talk or say, oh yeah, uh-huh, mm-hmm, uh-huh. And then it's so hard for the video editor to be able to cut those sound bites out. So that would be probably my one pet peeve that I would share with the manufacturers and distributors that are trying to create these stories. When you're doing the interview, shut your mouth. Be quiet and let them talk, so the poor video editor afterward can actually use that great soundbite, because there's nothing worse than finally getting the best character, the best story, getting this great soundbite, and then having the marketing person go, oh yeah, or reacting in between. What are maybe some of your pet peeves or things that you feel like don't do this, or mistakes that they should avoid?
Definitely there is an element of shutting your mouth, because as marketers, we are too close to our product and service, right? We have the expert language, the trap of the expertise. And there are ways that we describe things, or the words that we use, that we try to insert into the answer, right? So it's embracing that power of the pause, even when it feels hard, and being open to being curious and saying, well, that's interesting. Why was that important? Or tell me more about that. Or could you say that a different way? Because sometimes too, especially if you're interviewing your customer instead of a third party, for example, interviewing them, which I do highly recommend, because sometimes they'll say things to someone else that they might not say to you, is to dig into and just let them say it maybe a couple of different times, because they may feel like they want to impress you. They may want to make you happy. They may want to make you like them more, or they may want to use expert sounding language instead of really the language that you want them to use, which is the way they would say it. So the more you can ask, okay, tell me more. Tell me more about why was that important? Or that's interesting. What's another way you would describe that? Or was there anything else? Or I feel like I've gotten the picture, but is there something else you wanted to share? So just leaving enough space and kind of embracing the power of the pause to let them go beyond that initial answer and not rush to your next question right away.
I love that you say, is there anything else you want to share? That's a great tip. At the end, always asking, is there anything else that you want to talk about that we didn't talk about today? Every time I interview people, that's always the best soundbite. Any other tips that you would like to share with our audience?
I would say just get started, right? So think about, where are people getting stuck in your journey right now, right? What is one business challenge that what you've been doing hasn't been working for? And explore and just get curious. Ask the question, could we tell a story here that could shift the way people see us, think about us, or react to us in a way that would actually move them from being stuck to actually using story to move them through the journey?
And I'll practice what we preach, and I'll ask, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you really want people to take away from this conversation?
Well, that story isn't just for consumer audiences, right? That what we see is that in the research, B2B buyers want to see personal connection. They're looking for people to tell them why you're different, not just that you are different. So tell me the story behind the feature, the fact, the process, the service level. Give me an example so that I can see myself in that story.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
So thank you for having me here.